Well, hello and welcome to the latest edition of Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale. And you are very welcome indeed, whether you're joining me live right now and hopefully commenting on Purge TV, or whether you're joining me later on. Wherever you are all very welcome indeed. Let me just dive into the chat and check it's working, which I know it is because I'm joined with Paul Telford from sunny Liverpool and Andy Lightham. Hello, Andy. Good to see you. Likewise, Relic Life. Hello, good morning to you, wherever you are, somewhere well to the west of us. Lady Matriarch, thanks for the thing you sent me earlier on, Lady M. I'm covering it in the show. Much obliged to you. Right then, let me dive straight in with something about the fires. And actually, in fact, quite a lot about the fires. Now, I know that Jim Dowson covered this yesterday on Purge TV quite extensively, but I did some more digging, so I thought this was really interesting. Because I'm sure you'll have seen, in fact, if you've seen any TV news, read any newspapers, you can't have missed the headlines. Basically, climate change, fires ravage Europe. We're burning the world up. It's all a disaster and it's all our fault, which is, of course, a lie. And that's what I'm going to dig into quite deep right now. What we've got going on here is the old trick of the liberal mass media, the globalists, and especially the Eurocrats, never let a good crisis go to waste. And they've got a serious crisis in these fires, especially in France at present, with the whole city of Bordeaux at risk of being evacuated and potentially destroyed. And of course, this is being used as an excuse for what they really want, which is to pile on yet more of their ruinous net zero policies and taxes. These things are highly unpopular, of course. The only way they can push them through is if there's a really catastrophic problem which we have to address. And it looks superficially as though these fires are an example of that catastrophic problem. It's the result of global warming. Or is it? So I sat down and I asked this morning, I asked Meta AI, which is one of the AI machines. You get to it through WhatsApp. And it's a very politically correct version of AI. But I asked it a couple of questions, and bearing in mind how politically correct it is, so it should be wanting to say, yep, this is all climate change and so on. It's very interesting to see how it answered. Because first of all, I asked for a report into the role in the French and Spanish fires. They're also bad in Spain. I know they're also bad in parts of America and have been as well. But actually, everything that we learn from AI's Meta's response to me about Spain and France also, I'm sure, applies to the USA. So although this show is heavily biased towards Europe, American friends, this covers you as well. Likewise, the Aussies, I'm sure. So I asked specifically about the role in these fires of increased fuel loads, basically having more stuff lying around which can burn, and also in particular the extensive use and growing use of non-native pines and in Europe, eucalyptus trees in commercial forestry. And here is the report that came back. Now, I've put it actually in an article I've done on Substack, absolutely unedited, and I've added nothing into this. I've just taken out some of their more waffly bits. Anyway, I'll go through it. I'm paraphrasing this for you now. It's headed EU Rewilding, Payloads, and the Pine Eucalyptus Switch. Headline facts: how EU policies boosted fuel load. A. Land abandonment and rewilding. And AI tells me that 30% of EU agricultural land, that's all the agricultural land in the whole of the European Union, 56 million hectares, is at moderate or high risk of abandonment. Now, that really is a very large amount of land. When I was in the European Union, I sat on what was called the ENVI committee, the Environmental Committee. And I was there back in 2009, 10 up to 2014, when the other people on the ENVI committee were nearly all saying what we need is mass rewilding. Basically, in order to restore wildlife and keep the place beautiful and to sequester carbon, and that's the real problem here, they were saying the best way to do it, or one of the ways to do it, is simply to abandon vast swathes of land where the farmers are leaving or have died off anyway, and pay the last farmers to go and leave these areas to rewild. Just hands off, don't touch them. That was their model of rewilding. So this was especially in the areas where the fires are at their worst, especially in Spain and Italy and so on, this was what traditionally the landscape there looked like. Now, okay, perhaps in Paleolithic times it was covered in forest, but for all of modern history, you've had olive trees and cork trees and so on, with grazing land for sheep and pigs underneath them, bare by this time of year, not a blade of grass left. And on the hillsides, you've had large flocks of sheep and goats managed by shepherds who've eaten almost everything in sight, actually. And certainly, while you can have a fire on that sort of country, you can't have a catastrophic fire which destroys everything in its path and can't be stopped, because the traditional management simply stopped that happening. But sadly, that's no longer the case. So the report continues. The mechanism of this problem is abandonment of grazing and mowing and coppicing, and just leaving more and more flammable fuels to build up. The result, says AI, is a continuous landscape of dense vegetation capable of sustaining high-intensity wildfires, which is what's going on. And it says how this was funded through 2000 and on through Cap Natura, right the way up to now, with nature restoration and letting land go wild. That's quotes from the EU reports, without fuel management. Point B, AI says, another reason that this is government policy in the European Union, in Britain, and in the United States of America for sure. Government, federal policy, in your case Americans, conservation rules, fire exclusion policies, telling farmers and gamekeepers, no, you must not burn anything. You can't burn anything. If you do, we'll fine you. And none of the traditional burning and pastoralism that there used to be. And this report says it removed the old mosaic of farm, pasture and woodland. 63% of fires just burn off scrub and herbaceous vegetation, basically dry grass. That's all. Nothing more than that. They don't burn houses, they don't burn trees, they don't burn people. Normal fires in a normal landscape, managed by human beings for centuries, human beings who know what they're doing, namely farmers and peasant farmers. It burns off everything that was everything there which doesn't need to be there, basically, for the land, the scrub and the dried vegetation. New vegetation comes through. And then the next thing that this report says is that it's a shift to plantations, to giant forestry, in particularly what is called homogeneous stands. That's the same tree, the same tree, the same tree, rank after rank after rank of the same tree, most of them highly flammable imported species from somewhere else. In the case of the pines, they're from Norway. They grow very fast down in the sun and so on, but they're not designed, they haven't evolved to deal with fire. They go up like a Roman candle, and they're putting these trees in huge stands in much drier places with none of the native natural vegetation, which is more resistant to fire. And they're bringing eucalyptus trees from Australia, and they did this for timber and pulp. Now, I didn't know this, but the original planting of pines on Les Landes, which is the area which is now burning around Bordeaux, these were former peat bogs. And Napoleon said, right, these peat bogs, we've had some drought actually, they've dried out, we need to plant trees on them to stop the sand dunes from spreading. And likewise in Spain and Portugal, the fascist dictators Franco and Salazar also started planting eucalyptus trees. But I asked AI, so is this a fascist problem? No, because AI says that up to 90% of the current area in Spain and Portugal underneath eucalyptus forests was planted after 1975. This is democratic planting done with EU subsidies, paid for by British taxpayers. So it's now very, very clear. Let me just dive into the chat and check everything's good. It's a bit of a monologue, this one, but what have we got? Good morning, John Kawasaki. Good day to you, Ken Wood. Stuart Bowden, hello, great to see you here. Right, let me go back in. Hang on. No, I won't do that for a minute. Let me just get you another picky. I think it's what we need, isn't it? What have I got for you? Yeah, they are, for the sake of perhaps Americans or Brits who don't know what eucalyptus trees are. All the Aussies and possibly Kiwis watching will know, but that's a stand of eucalyptus trees. They're full of eucalyptus oil and they burn extraordinarily well. And they're one of the trees which the people in this place insisted, this is the European Commission, insisted that farmers all over Europe needed to plant if at all possible, if not plant pines. But yeah, let's produce all this new forestry really quickly. That's what we want. This is what happens when you get people who don't understand the countryside meddling in the countryside. Anyway, the EU, the Commission and the Parliament have actually just realised that they've made a mistake. I told them they were making a mistake 20 years ago. They wouldn't listen to me. So here we have the very international institution which is at the forefront of imposing net zero and climate change. It's the same one which helped to create the giant tinderboxes currently blazing in Spain. And they're now saying, oh, perhaps we made a bit of a mistake, and they're using yet more taxpayers' money to try and turn it around. That's pretty much where we are at the moment. Let's get rid of the European Commission, shall we? Right then. So I did some more digging into the historic situation, especially in France, because the forestry in France is older. It's been there since the 19th century, not because of the European Union. So I thought the first thing, because the BBC and Sky and so on are saying, we've never ever seen, no one's ever seen anything like this before. It's the worst fires in living memory. There's a bit of a clue actually to me that there might have been some worse fires out of living memory. But even there, actually, they're lying, because this isn't the worst fire in Les Landes, near Bordeaux, in living memory. There was a fire there in August 1949, which destroyed 50,000 hectares of forest and killed 82 people. As of today, the blaze in the exact same area has destroyed 42,000 hectares, i.e. less, and killed no one. So it's not the worst fire in living memory, because plenty of people can remember 1949. Now, returning to the Meta report, though, it emerges that having spent so much money and meddling time turning the whole of southern Europe basically into a giant tinderbox, the EU has finally, 20 years after I started telling them, woken up to the issue. And this is what the report says. When the EU recognised the problem, trigger 2022 and 2025 mega fires. A huge fire burnt 19,000 hectares in Les Landes, and it went underground into the peat, and then it reignited. Then last year, the worst on record, nearly a million hectares burnt in the EU as a whole, with 42,000 in this Gironde area. So the EU, by early this year, came up with this diagnosis, AI told me. They said, large and intense fires are increasing in frequency as a result of climate change. Yeah, we'll deal with that in a bit. And other factors such as land abandonment and subsequent fuel accumulation. Other factors such as land abandonment. They don't say that this is our fault, that we've been pushing this, and subsequent fuel accumulation. They don't say, sorry, hands up, we did that by banning farmers and gamekeepers from burning off scrub. No, they cover that over and say, oh, instead of that, we need healthy, actively managed landscapes because they're more resistant to wildfires. Well, thank you. As I say, I told them that in an Envy committee 20 years, nearly 20 years ago. They took no notice. They wouldn't even remember, because Griffin could never have told them anything right, because I was a monster, wasn't I? So they're now saying that instead of abandoning the land, they need actively managed landscapes. You tell me, who can actively manage a landscape of farmland? Who do you need? Yes, farmers. The very people they've been pushing off the land and are still pushing off the land. So how's the EU addressing it? They've had a policy switch from let it all grow to manage the fuel. So they're now, having spent billions getting it wrong, they're now spending, right now they've earmarked 1 billion to start putting it right, to pay farmers to stop them abandoning the land, and various other things, fire protection and so on, habitat restoration. They've got 9 special wildfire projects focusing on bringing in rare cattle to graze like cattle used to graze, and to create fuel breaks, which will be fire breaks. So they are finally getting it right. They're putting money into planes and helicopters. Well, once you've got a fire, you've got to put it out. But most of all is land management, fire exclusion, creating, they say, fuel discontinuity through mosaic landscapes, exactly what they used to have. So The report goes on, because I'd also asked it about the problem of pine and eucalyptus. It says the problem is flammability. Eucalyptus and pine resin burn hot and fast. They create fuel ladders which take the flames from the ground all the way up. Monocultures, they said, dense monocultures are a lose-lose scenario of low biodiversity, we knew that, and high fire risk, we knew that. In fact, now I think of it, National Front News, which was the paper of the National Front, when would it have been? About 1987, we had a headline in our Welsh version about how the Forestry Commission land in Wales was all one kind, one sort, just pine, the same pines, how they were not native to Britain, and they were not only dark and ugly, they were also very bad for the environment. I don't think we said they were a fire risk, because really to have a fire in, we've got a fire in Wales, the rest of the world really has gone up in flames already. But nevertheless, yeah, we pointed out what they're now saying, that mass plantation drives away the native breeds and species and leaves the terrain just basically abandoned and worthless, yeah, except for the forestry companies. We were saying that in 1986, 40 years ago. The nationalists of Britain were getting it right. Anyway, it goes on to say that now at least they're saying they've got to replant and rebuild differently to adapt to the climate change. So the bottom line, the report says, is that EU policies contributed by funding abandonment and restoration without fuel management and by subsidising pine eucalyptus monocultures, the EU unintentionally increased fuel continuity and flammability across southern Europe. And the Commission now frames fire as a land management crisis, not just about climate. So they're throwing money at it. So that's good, isn't it? But you see, have you been told on any of the TV programs in Britain or Europe or the United States of America, or anyone else for that matter, that the problem with these fires is not fundamentally climate change, it's these land management decisions by stupid and wicked government? I don't think you have, because I haven't been. On the subject of stupid and wicked government, where is he? Yes, if you looked at the thumbnail he used for this, I asked AI Grok, this was, to do me an image of a fire light going on in Leyland with Prince Charles, King Charles watching it. I expected it to put King Charles larger, but if you've got the right size screen, you will see that King Charles is there. Now, why did I pick on poor old Charlie? Because Charlie, my friends, is a carbon hoax profiteer of staggering proportions. He's a wind farm profiteer. As the monarch, he gets the rent from all the wind farms, all the offshore wind farms around the shores of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So King Charles, Prince Charles, because it was Duchy Lancaster before that, he has a huge vested interest in the climate scam, bringing him in vast sums of money every year. Not just him, Al Gore, people like that, and various corporations. Lots of people, well, actually not lots of people, a small number of people with lots of money are making vast sums of money out of all of this. And sometimes people get burnt and farmers get ruined and all the rest of it. Doesn't matter. These people make lots of money. And all these people, if they're pushed, they will now, as the EU is saying. They're saying they will admit that the extra fuel load, bad management of land is a problem, but that it's climate change that's making it so much more dangerous, so much more disastrous. It's a little bit hard to counter that, because you can see for yourself, summers are hotter than they used to be. The winters, overall, there's less snow than, if you're my age, you and I grew up with. So it's quite easy to sell the notion of man-made climate change. Except, of course, that is not true. The founding lie of man-made climate change is where they start on the records, because they start on the modern records in about 1870. And Al Gore's absolutely notorious hockey stick graph is the classic example of this. It shows basically the temperature is going up since 1870 on average, partly because the places they're measuring the temperatures, like airports and so on, have got hotter, But also I think it's fair to say because the climate probably has got a bit hotter since then, which wouldn't be surprising because in 1870, it's when the climate of the world, especially the Northern Hemisphere, started bouncing back after the unusually cold period when, for instance, the mini ice age, when Charles Dickens thought that it really did snow every Christmas. And people believed that the idea that the Thames could freeze over and you'd have an ice there on it wasn't that unlikely because it was in living memory. It had happened. So knowing how these people have lied about that, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll also ask Meta AI for another report, short one, this time into historic droughts into the areas now so dramatically on fire. And here's what it came up with. But before I do that, let me just dive back into the chat. Say hello to anyone fresh. Hang on. Don't panic. Don't panic. Andy Lightham, 1987 NF News, great information production, red top paper, and became green as third way. Andy Lightham really does know his stuff. Andy, the number of people who know that is vanishingly small, my friend. Very, very good. Paul Telford, could the fires become a way of getting the food shortage plan they have for us? I don't think so, Paul, because basically the fires are affecting areas such as the forestry and so on, which don't produce food. They're also burning some vines, but we can survive without wine. Even I can survive without wine. As a matter of fact, I prefer the stuff from further south than Bordeaux anyway. So no, I don't think so. What it will do, of course, it is destroying another large sections of another quite important industry, namely forestry and so on, namely forestry. So yeah, it's certainly having an effect. John Ventre, good to see you, John, also from across the water, where I think it's as hot as it is here. But right, let me dive back in because there's lots more to say. Hold on, just check I haven't got a... Yeah, I have, you see. I should have me speaking to you and not a pile of eucalyptus trees. Sorry about that. Right then. So the report headlined, Major Droughts in Southern France and Spain, 19th and 20th century versus today. And this, I think, this is what they should tell you. The fact they haven't told you this tells you that they know they're lying to you because they want to con you into accepting the net zero madness, which is going to be even worse, by the way, in its end result than this lot. The report says, before the big land use changes of the late 20th century, pine, eucalyptus plantations, and rural abandonment, both regions had several severe droughts. In the 19th century, what it calls pre-industrial droughts. Spain, between 1790 and 1830, as part of a broad European mega drought. You ever heard of the European mega drought of 1770 to 1840? No, I hadn't. I hadn't done. So the Little Ice Age, particularly strong in the 1850s, 1860s, in turn was only following on from a broader European mega drought in the summer. And what we know, reconstructed from various, all sorts of different data and so on, is that, quote, droughts were more frequent and severe during the early 19th century compared to the late 19th century. And the severity, in fact, is similar only to the last 20 years. So tip that back the other way. The last 20 years of drought aren't exceptional. They're just back to what was normal for a large swathe of the 18th and early 19th century. The impacts back in those days weren't fires in forests because there weren't forests like this. They hadn't been planted there, but crop failures and famines. And in the big droughts of these periods, in fact, going back to the 15th century, another wave of droughts, mills stopped working, water dried up completely. In the 1810s, there was a widespread total collapse of agriculture in the whole of northern Spain. It really was catastrophic. Now, as to how bad the fires were, records are sparse because it wasn't an issue, because fuel was kept very low by grazing and cropping. So drought produced hunger, but not mega fires. But it was drought and hot weather nonetheless. Then Meta AI looked at France and said that in 1719, following extreme heat and drought, dysentery killed 450,000 people that year, 2% of France's population. Now that's a heat-generated climate change catastrophe in 1719, before the Industrial Revolution even began. Goes on the history of this in the mid to late 1800s. France, there was no long-term drought trend there then, but in 1880 to 1900, 20 years, France had the most severe droughts recorded, in fact, between 1915 and 1955. So actually the 1800s in France were quite humid compared to the 20th century. But the 20th century record, there were major Spanish droughts in the 1940s and in the 1990s and now. Major southern French droughts, the worst ones were in 1921. As part of a pan-European drought, it was twice or four times the average in terms of how many places dried out. In France, Germany, Eastern Ukraine, it was far worse than anything we've had since 1921. Other big ones in the 1940s, massive droughts in Iberia and France. So this is really quite normal. Getting on to the end of this here, the drought severity. This report told me just now, in 1812 to 25 and 1921 were far more intense and covered larger areas than the recent ones. In terms of heat, 1540 was the hottest. Yep, long time ago. But fires were rare because the landscape was different. Simple as that. So the key difference is that now these sort of heats, because we fight fires and we rescue people and so on, these days the heat and fires burn giant forests. In those days, people died of hunger and disease. And it's all to do with land use having changed. I think that's about it, really. So it says the heat is particularly bad now, but fires are the new impact, the new difference. Instead of famine, we get fire because the fuel load, this is from the report, is 10 times higher in 2025 than it was before modern times. That's the reason the fires are so bad. So the report concludes that the climate signal is similar, i.e. it's hot sometimes and dry, but the human landscape has completely changed, and that's the problem. So these droughts, this hot weather, it's entirely within the normal historical range of climate change, because yes, of course, the climate has changed, but it's a natural change. That's the fact. The thing that's changed is the man management. So the fires are man-made. Yep, because we've changed the landscape. And also because, according to the French Ministry of Agriculture right now, human activity is responsible for 9 out of 10 wildfires in the country. Discarded cigarettes, campfires, negligence, and arson. The cause of the Bordeaux blaze still going on isn't known yet, but the blaze near Paris, also still not yet out, has definitely been confirmed as arson. So the climate's changed as it always changes. But it's not climate change that's man-made, but the fires are. That's it, basically. Finally, of course, the fact that there's TV crews there, or that people have got mobile phones which take good enough footage to show on your TV screen, that means that the public are more aware of this, and the propagandists of net zero and global governments, global tyranny, the people who want to use a crisis to force you to accept their solution, the instant availability of video footage makes it easier for them to do so and makes us think, oh, perhaps there's more of this than there used to be. I'll tell you this grotesque dishonesty is not a victimless crime. It's not just something that means that perhaps the problems in France won't get sorted out. Every time they tell the man-made climate change lie, it doesn't just facilitate huge transfers of wealth from ordinary people, us, you, to the super rich. It also helps to perpetuate their mistakes and to empower them to make even bigger and even more dangerous ones. And here's the real crux of this. If you think that the results of the EU and the US federal forestry and land management policies are bad, which they are, you wait until you see what their net zero sabotage of the industrial and agricultural basis of the whole modern world ends up with. They're not just going to burn down a few rather ecologically challenged forests, they're going to destroy our entire civilization. So, rather as Paul Telford suggested, actually, is this about getting rid of the food? Well, not quite. But the same folly and arrogance which has led them to create this forestry fire disaster is the same as that which will create the food disaster. Even if it's not deliberate, they're going to do it by the accident of their stupidity. I think with some of them it is deliberate. The Bill Gateses of this world. The real satanic influence ones, yes. Others, it's the evil that good men do. It's the road to hell being paved with good intentions. And then there's one other factor which is making this, it's telescoping, bringing rapidly closer the time when this food crisis could become all too real. And that's the ongoing crash in fertilizer production and distribution being created by the continuing Trump-Netanyahu war on Iran, which is speeding up rapidly the onset of the coming completely artificially induced net zero global famine. Again, the leftists, you see, they'll say that, good old Joe Stalin, you know, he did industrialize Russia and he did help the place. And it was just an oversight that it created famine. It was a mistake. Well, to a degree, of course, not just Stalin, but the Bolshevik apparatchiks, the people running the famine in Ukraine, which has created so much hatred against Russia in Ukraine, were also running a famine aimed at starving to death and eliminating the peasant farmers of Russia as well as Ukraine. And it wasn't an accident, that famine, it was deliberately man-made. Just as the net zero global famine that we've got coming up is also artificial and it's going to be man-made. And it's going to be, like I say, telescoped far faster, because in addition to their systematic destruction of the industrial and energy base of the entire modern world and its giant population, they are also, through their war, just stopping fertilizer production right now for this season, for next season. And I'll tell you, you will see if the fire around Bordeaux goes on for a few days longer, you may well see 300,000-400,000 people being evacuated from that city. It's already down there. It's probably the largest movement of internal refugees in any European country since not long after the Second World War. But what's going on there now, what could go on there in a week's time if there's another wave of fires, will be utterly swamped by the hundreds of millions of genuine hunger refugees who one day, potentially quite quickly, are going to pour out of Asia and Africa in the hope of finding in the equally or almost equally ruined countries of Britain and France and Italy and America and so on, a few crumbs in the ruins of our own devastated prosperity. That is where these people are taking us. It is truly, truly frightening, and you need to stock up. You need friends. You need to build some sort of resilience into your lives, because the people running the show not only are not helping, they're actively making it worse. And some of them are doing so deliberately. Right, what are we on? It's 16:35. Andy, they didn't listen. No, indeed not. Brian Hope, good afternoon, Brian. How are you? Good to see you in. Excellent stuff. Right then, I'll dive back in here. And what have I got for you? Yes, just another thing just on that before I move on. The costs in Britain alone of the green energy initiatives, aka the destruction of our energy base, will reach more than £40 billion per year by the end of the decade. This is a new report out. The total spending on so-called eco policies has gone up by 6 times since 2010, and it's driving up bills for ordinary people. Electricity subsidies, which we pay for, because this is subsidies not to us for our bills, this is subsidies to the people producing wind power, for instance. 2010, they were £500 million a year. They're now nearly £12 billion a year. They're going to reach £15 billion a year by 2030. Grid integration costs, aka patching the thing up so that their semi-worthless various new fuel systems don't cause it to crash. Grid integration costs have increased from 2.8 billion in 2010 to 8 billion a year now. And they're going to rise, get this, in the next 6 years, they're going to rise from 8 billion to 25 billion pounds a year in Britain. staggering sums of money. According to this is a report by the Prosperity Institute, this is going to cost £1,400 per household per year. I can tell you there's very, very many, there's millions of households in Britain who just don't have £1,400 a year spare to spend. As energy researcher David Turber says, these extra costs are not sustainable and run the risk of creating an economic catastrophe. An economic catastrophe to go with the energy catastrophe, to go with the immigration catastrophe, to go with the famine catastrophe. This is a convergence of catastrophes, and it's coming our way. Right then, moving on, and still the folly of government. Sorry to people abroad that this is very heavily British based, really, but it does affect all of us. Lady M kindly sent me a Substack from a fellow called Gawain Towler, who writes on Substack as Fainting in Coils, an article called The Maggot in the Fleece. It starts, Whitehill will admit, let into Britain, almost anyone, except the 75 men we actually need. And he's talking about 75 men, that's all, who every spring fly in from New Zealand to help with the British sheep shearing season. And every autumn, probably a similar number of youngish men leave places like Northumberland and Wales and Scotland, and they go over to help out with their sheep shearing season. But the New Zealanders are basically the best sheep shearers in the world, with respect to the Welsh and the Northern English and so on. They're really good. 75 of them come in and they shear vast numbers of sheep. And as Mr. Towler points out, they don't sign on, they don't take up a housing list, they don't bring anything with them, they don't commit crimes, and when they finish, they go home. And apparently, in January, the Home Office announced that these men are no longer welcome in Britain. I'll get you a picture of someone shearing a sheep. There you go. There's a fella shearing a sheep. He's actually a New Zealander, and he's at it, and they shear a sheep in about 90 seconds or so. The sheep don't get stressed. It's not so bad for them, and it's really important. But they're no longer welcome, the Home Office said, creating a mass of complaints from farmers and so on and so forth, which after about a month did create a concession that they'd be allowed in this year, but after next season they won't be. This is because, you see, because they come in and they work from farm to farm, there's no one who's a licensed sponsor of skilled labour to stand in for them and apply for them a license for them to come in. Now, in Britain, there are 140,000 different firms and institutions who have one of these licenses to sponsor skilled workers to come into the country. Yeah, so the system is there. And out of the 140,000 firms and institutions, there are, according to Mr. Towler, 159 kebab shops, 79 vape shops, 90 newsagents, 100 barbers, and 16 car washes. There's also a mosque in London, which is under investigation from the counter-terror people. They're also able to bring in whoever they propose. But you see, because there's no box in the list of skills for sheep shearing, these New Zealanders don't count as skilled, so no one can bring them in under this system. So they're going to be shut out because they're unskilled. Yeah, because 6 of these New Zealanders working out of Coquetdale up in the northeast of England sheared between them nearly 90,000 sheep. It's 15,000 animals per man in a very short season up in Northumbria. But they're not skilled. No, they're not as skilled as Abdullah works in a vape shop. Now, he's seriously skilled, isn't he? They can only shear 15,000 sheep in less than half a year each. They're not skilled at all. Now, Mr. Towler is a really fine writer. If you're on Substack, do go and give him a sub. Do go and follow him. He says this, and I couldn't word this better. He says about these men that there's something, it's a word that's no longer allowed to be used, these men. He says this, they're family. They inherited the same common law, the same language, the same book of common prayer, the same regimental battle honours on the same walls. Their great-grandfathers came 11,000 miles to die at Gallipoli and on the Somme for a country most of them had never seen, unquote. Beautifully put. The man really is a fine writer. So the Ministry of Ag and the Labour Party, the Labour government have said, well, the way to put this right is to train Brits instead to shear the sheep. It's going to be difficult because the New Zealanders being the best sheep shearers in the world, young British sheep shearers, like I said before, from the upland parts of the country, regularly go to New Zealand in our winter, their early summer, and they shear with them, and they learn how to shear sheep very quickly. So, as Mr. Towler points out, what the minister is saying is he's proposing to improve the domestic pipeline by demolishing the pump that feeds it. Absolutely insane. The National Crime Agency admits that the barber shops, the vapes, the nail bars, the sweet shops, the car washes, all of the ones which are bringing people in by the thousands, are routinely used as fronts for laundering money with drug trafficking and organised immigration crime and modern slavery. The National Crime Industry estimates that £1 billion a year is washed through the premises opened up with this system, which has been shut down for 75 New Zealand sheep shearers. Staggering, absolutely staggering. Now, it's obviously an insult to us. It's an insult to the taxpayers. It's horrifying to those of us who are very rightfully, seriously worried, desperately worried about the immigration problem. But there's another issue to this, and that is the impact on the sheep. And at least the Greens and the leftists and the the knitted sandal wearers and so on, they should worry about this. I'm going to show you what blowfly strike does to a sheep. Because, see, it's not just the fact that if a sheep doesn't have its woolly jumper taken off, it gets too hot. No, if a sheep doesn't have its woolly jumper taken off, it's probably going to die of fly strike, because the wool gets dirty. Green bottle flies lay their eggs on the wool. The eggs hatch and the little larvae burrow down to the flesh of the sheep, or the skin of the sheep, and they start eating it alive. And some years ago, when my wife and I, we reared orphan sheep, a couple each year through the summer, and then had them killed to eat in the autumn, we had a fly which was hit by a sheep was hit by fly streak. The neighbouring farmer's lad did manage to save it, but seeing a sheep which you're actually very fond of, and you pull back the wool, and you can see that there's not skin there, there's just a gaping wound with maggots just swarming in it, crawling all over it, writhing in it. It's truly horrible, and it's very, very painful to the sheep. It's being eaten alive, and not shearing them, or even not shearing them quick enough. And without those 75 New Zealanders, the sheep shearers of Britain will not be able to shear the sheep quick enough, and sheep as a result will suffer like this.
All right, so I've just caught this sheep because it's got fly strike on it, and I'm just going to sort that out. You see, yeah, I've got an audience over there, and that's the problem with having sheep away from your home on little bits of land. Is, you know, it's the evening, I've finished work, gone to pick up my daughter, and I went home to get some stuff to deal with this, and that's just the way it is. Just so you can see what I've seen. The wool's really damp there. I've seen some flies around it as well, and if I look into there, I don't know if I'll be able to see any maggots. Yeah, there they are in there. You might see them just up there moving away as I move them. So I'm going to clip away the wool. I'm going to add some spot on.
Right, that's quite enough of that. If you know anything about sheep, you will know that just to walk up to a sheep lying on the ground and to do that to it without holding it down is impossible, unless the sheep is basically close to death, which that sheep is, because it's quite recently been hit by fly strike. Absolutely gruesome. And that's what the Labour government and the Tories have said nothing, and all the rest of them, that's what they are doing right now, or setting up for next year for the sheep of Great Britain. Quite apart from what they're setting up for us and our children and our grandchildren. These people are the wickedest of monsters. Right, I've run out of time there, it would seem to me. I was going to show you, well, I will actually, because I'll show you one little picture I found the other day, a little meme doing the rounds on the internet. I was sent by several different people, actually. Here you go. We should have listened to Enoch Powell and Nick Griffin. Indeed, they should have done. And yeah, that's circulating right now. I was rather pleased to see that. Yeah, it's It's spreading. People are getting the message. Right, I'm going to leave you very promptly now, because for an end slate, and also to go with that people should have listened to Nick Griffin and the British National Party. Yeah, many good people really put a huge amount of effort into that. So this was me speaking in 2006 outside Westminster. So I've got an end slate of about six minutes, just over 7 minutes actually, quite a long one. And the sound quality isn't particularly good, and the film quality is poor as well. This is 20 years ago. But I think it's interesting, one, what we were speaking about then, but also towards the end of it, when I'm talking about the prospects for the future. And I'm talking about how we've radically changed. We've made it so that now all the other parties are talking about immigration, which they wouldn't before. I'm not fooled. I do say they're only going to talk to make real change. We need 3 or 4 people in the Houses of Parliament. And I was struck with this, I'd forgotten making this, how realistic this is compared with the likes of Rupert Lowe and the people supporting him, when they're saying, with nothing like a far bigger party, but nothing like the organisational basis and the electoral skills that we had, and the public support and the political space that we had, they're saying we're going to come to power, we're going to sweep to power, we're going to have a majority of seats in that place. 20 years ago, I was explaining what we'd achieved, saying how it was only a first stage, and talking in terms of if we could just get 3 or 4 people in that place, how that would then make a difference to the issue of the immediate problem of immigrants pouring in. So you compare and contrast that with the people now saying that they're going to change Britain, and I think it's an interesting thing to do. Right, I'm going to leave you with that and urge you to join Brother Dowson tomorrow, same time, same place, 4 o'clock on Purged, or afterwards on Catch Up for that matter, on Purge TV for the Templar Report, and also to join him for the Templar Sunday service on, of course, would you believe it, Sunday. Until then, I pledge, if at all possible, to be with you next Wednesday, and remind you that whatever, no I won't, because I can't remember what I was going to say. Yes, of course I can. That all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. So you, being good men and good women, you need to get out there and keep on doing something. Until next Wednesday, God willing, Desvold.
It's taken 5 years to organise and modernise the British National Party so that we become electable. And in the last couple of years we have indeed been elected. We've now got a record number of 25 local councillors, the length and breadth of the country. But it's only 25 councillors, not a single MP. We've never, as far as I know, even had anyone step inside the Houses of Parliament. But even without stepping inside it, we've had an immense effect. In the last few weeks, the whole of British politics has become centred around our core issue, immigration and asylum. When the likes of Blunkett or Clark and Blair and Howard talk about the British people now being concerned about asylum and this being a legitimate concern, when they talk about immigration having gone so far that it's now a legitimate concern, they are only talking about these things because the British National Party and our success so far has forced them to talk about these things. We are the ones who made them sit up and take notice of the British people, because they don't take any notice at all of what people say in pubs or in their own front room. They can ignore that. They're only taking notice because the British people are showing now that they're prepared to take their fears and their moans and their grumbles and to put them behind an organised, modernised political party which will really do something to put things right. So it's the success, the advance of the British National Party which has put, first of all, asylum on the agenda, and then in the last few days the whole question of immigration and multiculturalism on the agenda as well. We had an amazing BBC News at 10 report where they actually showed the same footage in Green Street in East London, the same footage of 1 or 2 white people surrounded by a sea of non-white immigrants there, many of whom perfectly decent people, but that's not the point. As this BBC broadcast showed the other day, they started off saying that 50 years ago this was a white working class community, and then they showed the last couple of whites in the whole area. Now we did that on our British National Party TV broadcast last year for the European elections, and we were slammed as being extremists, and troublemakers, and now BBC, the very heart of the multicultural, multiracial propaganda machine, was saying precisely the same thing, and saying this area used to be a white working class community and now it is changed completely. And they showed an old lady, a white old lady there, and they said, well, how do you feel about this? And she paused and she said, well, to be honest, we feel marginalised. And then they went to an old white fella in the street and said, what does he feel about living in that area now? And he said, well, most mornings I'm the only honky in the street. And our pressure has forced the BBC and the whole of the British establishment to start openly talking about issues like that. We're taking it far beyond just asylum. It's now about the whole question of what this country was, what this country is now, and the danger of what this country is going to become unless, in the very short space of time, we can turn things around. And we've done that with just 25 councillors. So far, of course, you know, they're only going to be talking about these things. There's an election coming, so they'll talk tough on immigration. After the election, they'll try and forget all about it. But not if we're there to keep on pressing and pushing and making it clear that the British people now have a real choice. They don't have to vote for a party such as the Labour Party, which wants a lot more immigration, or the Lib Dems, who want unlimited immigration, or the Conservatives, who only want immigration if they'll come here and take our jobs. That's not a choice anymore. It's now a choice between all the parties who want immigration and the British National Party, which says, quite simply, this country is full. We will not allow any of them, more of them, into our country under any circumstances whatsoever. If we need our own doctors, our own nurses, then we must pay our own people enough money and give them enough training so they can do the jobs for us, instead of looting the third world of cheap doctors and nurses who in fact are far more badly needed over there than they are over here. But we're only going to get that constant pressure if we can build on our 25 councillors and get more councillors, and in due course get people into here. It's been said as a joke that the only man ever to enter Parliament with honest intentions was Guy Fawkes. I've got some sympathy with the view, but actually it's not true. In recent times you can think, for example, of people like Enoch Powell, Peter Shaw, Sir Richard Body, even someone like Tony Benn. They were decent, honest men there for their own decent and honest intentions, even if sometimes some of those intentions were misguided. But the pack of them in there now are utterly useless. They're corrupt and they've sold this country out. And we only need 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 British National Party MPs in that place to transform British politics even further. You think of what we've done with 25 councillors, we get through 3 or 4 MPs in there, and all the corruption and the perversion and the dealing in cocaine in the toilets in that place, it's all going to come to a grinding halt, or we're going to be able to expose it. Because even when we're in there, we're not going to be part of their party game. We'll be part of the British parliamentary process, part of the British constitutional process, but we're not going to be part of their parliamentary shadowboxing. We're going to be in there, but something quite apart and separate from that. And the very shock of having 3 or 4 of us in there, really probing, really pushing, really complaining and exposing corruption, and really showing that there is now a parliamentary bloc which gives the British people a genuine choice. That is going to have so much impact on British politics that even if we didn't get anyone elected past those 3 or 4, we will transform this country. Certainly what's happening now in places like Denmark and Holland, where basically the doors have been slammed tight on immigration, if we just get 1 British National Party MP in there, let alone 3 or 4, I guarantee you the same thing will happen. That in itself isn't enough. The whole question of the problems of multiculturalism and multiracialism and the way in which we British have been turned into second-class citizens in our own country, that's a whole separate debate. It's a whole series of extra problems that have got to be addressed, talked about and dealt with. But the very first thing to do is to shut the doors to any more coming in. And if over the next few years, not necessarily this election, but if we use this election as a building block, and in 1 or 2 elections' time we've got a small number of British National Party MPs in that place, I guarantee you the doors to our poor, overcrowded country will be slammed shut for good.